At the start of the Fourth Age, no one had a tougher job than Aragorn, using the regnal name of Elessar. He now ruled over the Reunited Kingdom, a superstate that encompassed much of the old lands of both Arnor and Gondor. Except much of the Reunited Kingdom existed mostly on paper, and Aragorn would have to appease friends, foes, and reorganize his lands if he wanted his new realm to truly be the superpower of the Fourth Age. In this video, we look at Aragorn's reforms to his Reunited Kingdom. In an interview with Rolling Stone back in 2014, George R.R. Martin, the author of A Song of Ice and Fire, perhaps better known as Game of Thrones, explained that one of the minor problems he has with Tolkien was his unwillingness to delve into the minor details. The most famous example, which has become something of a meme, was what was Aragorn's tax policy. Unfortunately, we have no idea what Aragorn's tax policy was, but in saying that, we actually know quite a lot of new things that Aragorn introduced when he became king of the Reunited Kingdom. When you look at how things could have gone, Gondor actually emerged from the War of the Ring relatively unscathed. Civilian losses were likely negligible, military losses were absorbable. Aragorn had managed to capture a fleet of at least 30 large ships and a number of smaller vessels. And most importantly, Gondor's closest enemy had been utterly destroyed, and its vast network of subjects was bound to collapse. In fact, even as early as Aragorn's coronation, emissaries from Harad arrived to secure peace with Gondor. So Gondor had at least a temporary reprieve from external enemies. But the thing is, Gondor wasn't just Gondor now, because it was Aragorn's intention to reclaim at least most of the lands that made up the old northern kingdom of Arnor. Most of these lands had been heavily depopulated or even entirely uninhabited for the better part of 1,000 years, so it's not like Aragorn was asserting control over a well-developed, economically prosperous area. Entire regions would need to be resettled and old cities would need to be rebuilt, so Aragorn would need to be present in both regions that were divided by a journey of several weeks. Let's start with internal affairs. Obviously, Aragorn becoming king was a huge change in itself, as Gondor had been without a king for 1,000 years, and had been ruled by the ruling stewards. Aragorn taking the crown ended the role of the ruling steward, but he had no intention of ending the role of steward in its entirety. Instead, he reversed it back to the way it was before Mardil Vorin Way. The stewards would be the chief councillor in the newly revived Great Council of Gondor, and the steward would be a regent if the king was away or if he was ill. Faramir wasn't just given this downgrade though, he was actually rewarded with a brand new title, the Prince of Ithilien, and he would be given dwellings in the hills of Emin Arnon near to the Anduin. While Ithilien was a battleground for much of the final years of the Third Age, before that it was one of Gondor's primary heartland provinces, and largely considered to be one of the most beautiful places in Gondor, so this was quite a reward. However, it came with a lot of responsibilities. Faramir would have to rehabilitate the old territory, clear of any remaining outlaws and orcs, and perhaps the most painful job, cleansing the Morgul Vale in hope that one day Minas Ithil could be rebuilt. So Faramir was given 2 hereditary titles, but Tolkien states that he would still be second in power to the Prince of Dol Amroth. Whether he meant this literally, in the sense that Dol Amroth was clearly the more powerful province, or that the Prince of Ithilien was below the Prince of Dol Amroth in rank, is unknown. What we do know is that Aragorn kept them on equal footing in regards to military matters. If the king was away on an expedition, either the Prince of Dol Amroth or the Prince of Ithilien would need to stay at home as a military commander. In terms of other matters, while he did give orders to destroy Minas Morgul entirely, we're never told his plans regarding Osgiliath. Given its location, it's almost certain that parts of the city were rebuilt, especially the main bridge across to Anduin. It may have even been repeopled, as it is said that the population of Gondor grew once again under Aragorn. What we do know for certain is that Aragorn intended for Minas Tirith to remain the capital. Alright, so what about the old region of Arnor? Like I said before, this was going to be difficult. The only real population centres left in the north were the Shire and Breeland. The Dunedain of the north, once the core of Old Arnor, had grown few, perhaps as little as a few hundred individuals and certainly no more than a few thousand. Maybe enough for the start of a city, but not for an entire kingdom. Nevertheless, Aragorn had ambitious plans. He had a house rebuilt in the Numinas by the shores of Lake Evendim, and according to Gandalf, he also had plans to rebuild Fornos to reign. Obviously, it would take generations before either city came close to rivaling its splendour in the past. A lot of Aragorn's reforms targeted the Shire. Because of what had happened during the scouring of the Shire, in Year 6 of the Fourth Age, Aragorn issued a law that no man was to enter the Shire, a law that even he followed. Whenever he wanted to visit his friends in the Shire, he would only go as far as the bridge that crossed the Brandywine. Presumably, this law did not apply to elves and dwarves, who had always passed through the Shire far more regularly than men had. He also made the Shire a free land, basically an autonomous part of the Reunited Kingdom that was under its protection. These were far from Aragorn's only gifts to the Shire. In 11 of the Fourth Age, Merry became Master of Buckland, and in 13 of the Fourth Age, Pippin became the Thane of the Shire, and Sam became Mayor of Mickle Delving for the second time. All three of these positions were mostly ceremonial, but that same year, Aragorn gave them extra prestige by naming all three positions as official councillors of the Northern Kingdom. Not even Aragorn was above a bit of friendly nepotism, although who can say they didn't deserve it. And finally, in 31 of the Fourth Age, Aragorn gifted the land of Westmarch to the Shire. By Westmarch I don't mean the region in Rohan, but rather a land that was between the Far Downs and the Tower Hills. A large number of hobbits immediately moved there, and Pippin named Fastred of Greenholm as the first Warden of the Westmarch. Fastred had married Eleanor Gardner, Sam's eldest daughter, so yeah, this was still nepotism. The Shire wasn't the only place that Aragorn gave something to. A place that got a similar deal to the Shire was the Druidan Forest, home of the Druidine who had helped the Rohirrim prior to the Battle of Pelennor Fields. Like the Shire, the Druidan Forest would be an independent enclave, and no man would be allowed to enter without their leave. For their role in the defeat of Saruman, Aragorn also gave away the Ring of Isengard to the Ents. It would now be known as the Treegarth of Orthanc. While Orthanc would technically remain in Gondor's possession, Aragorn gave instructions to Treebeard that none should enter there without his leave. Okay, let's talk external affairs. In the day after his coronation, there were a lot of people who wished to speak with the king of the new reunited kingdom. Many of these were friends. Emissaries arrived from the lands that bordered Mirkwood. The chief of these were emissaries from Erebor and Dale. They swore friendship with Gondor, and the two kingdoms would remain under the protection of the reunited kingdom for many years to come. Emissaries may have also arrived from the Beornings and the Woodmen, but it's never clarified. But it was also old foes that came to Minas Tirith. Emissaries arrived from Dunland, presumably to make peace. Dunland, as part of Enedwaith, had once technically been part of Gondor. We're unsure if this was reinstated, or whether the Dunlendings were allowed to remain independent. Knowing the kind of person Aragorn was, I'd expect the latter, as long as they promised not to cause problems. Emissaries also arrived from the east and south. At the very least, preliminary talks resulted in Aragorn making peace with at least some of the Haradrim, and it resulted in him pardoning and releasing any captive Easterlings. Perhaps Aragorn's most ambitious foreign policy move early in his reign was in regards to Nirn. If you're unaware, Nirn was the relatively fertile southern region of Mordor, its fields tilled by slaves who worked to feed Sauron's armies. Aragorn not only freed these slaves, but he also gave them all of the lands around Lake Nirnan for them to make as their own. Although not explicitly mentioned, one would assume that this new land was also under the protection of the reunited kingdom. Last but not least, Aragorn and Éomer, now King of Rohan, renewed the Oath of Eorl and the eternal friendship between their kingdoms. There were no gifts or concessions here. Aragorn and Éomer were close friends, and both kingdoms had fought side by side without hesitation for centuries at this point. And that leads me to the final part of Aragorn's foreign affairs, the inconvenient truth that the end of Sauron did not mean the end of war. We're said that even early in his reign, Aragorn was forced to campaign far afield to put down some of Sauron's old servants in both Rhûn and Harad, and that Éomer and his knights joined him on these expeditions. It seems these expeditions were ultimately successful. Both the reunited kingdom and Rohan grew powerful and prospered, and places like Umbar, long a thorn in the side of the Free Peoples, was finally subdued, although it's not clear if the city was retaken by the Dunedain or whether they were just forced to the peace table. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. If you're interested in more about Aragorn's tax policy, my only question is why, and my only answer is Probably very lenient to begin with, because Aragorn would have had a lot of spoils of war that probably could have funded many major projects, and he wouldn't have wanted to curb anything like population growth and prosperity with excessive taxes. That's obviously all just speculation. Cheers, farewell, and remember, supreme executive power derives from a mandate from the masses, not from some farcical coronation ceremony.